Hi everyone, and welcome to our daily show, The Big Story, where we discuss the hottest topics of the day right here in the heart of the newsroom. My name is Alyssa Wu, and I'm coming to you live from the Straits Times. We are streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, do subscribe to our channel, and to be notified whenever we go live, do click that bell icon. I'll be joined by my newsroom colleagues very shortly to discuss the topics that got you talking today. In the latest marriage and parenthood measures announced by the government on August 28, some of the policy enhancements announced include making quality preschools more affordable and accessible for families, and also raising the age limit for women seeking fertility treatment, which includes IVF. To discuss whether these enhancements will address the declining marriage and birth rate in Singapore, I have education correspondent Amelia with me. Hi, Amelia.
Hi.
So today we're going to focus on the preschool and fertility policy enhancements. What are your honest opinions about them? Maybe we can start with preschool.
Okay, so for preschool, what they're doing is to raise the income ceiling, monthly income ceiling for subsidies for families and earning 6,000 to 7,500 currently, and this will be raised to 12,000 next year. So that's quite a huge jump, and it will benefit a lot more middle income families, and meaning they can get higher subsidies, additional subsidies apart from just the lower income families. So altogether this will be about 30,000 more families than currently. And I think this helps to lower expenses for more families because if you're a young parent, you would tend to have kids in quick succession, most parents, and you would have more than 2 or 3 kids in preschool at the same time. And if now currently the median monthly fee for preschool full day childcare is 850 per month. So if you have 2 or more kids in preschool at the same time, it can be quite a hefty expense.
And that also depends on what preschool they go to. If they go to a private one, it can easily top more than $1,000 a month.
Yeah, it can go up to like 2,000 per month. Yeah, but those families, they choose that sort of preschool, and I guess they can afford it as well. So 850 is more the median for most preschools in Singapore.
I understand. What about your opinions on the fertility enhancements?
Okay, so this is it's a bit tricky. This is the group that may or may not have children. They are either trying for their first or they have one and they want more. They're lifting the age limit, which is currently 45 for women seeking treatment, mainly IVF. And they're also removing the maximum number of cycles that you can go for. Currently it's 5 for those who are above 40, and then 10 for those who are younger. They're also introducing co-funding, co-government co-funding for IUI, which some couples try before IVF. So most pro-family advocates and most people will think that it's a good move now because then there's no age limit to having children, right? And more couples are marrying later, so you would try for kids later as well. So, but I think it also should not mean that we shouldn't take this change to mean that the chances of having a baby at a later age have improved, because the science has not advanced and it's not true. Your pregnancy, you don't get any more pregnant as you get older. It gets harder, and it's just that the risk of complications during pregnancy and safety has greatly reduced with advances in technology.
Now, do you think putting in more money for the preschools and all these fertility treatments and removing the age limit, do you think that will actually help to raise the falling birth rate and the marriage rate?
This is the 8th round of enhancements to marriage and parenthood incentives since 2001. And since then, I don't know, no one can really say for sure whether the previous packages have really had any effect. And so we really have to wait and see. I don't know whether these initiatives will really convince Singaporeans to have babies. But I think the changes do help to tackle certain pain points of young parents and also those who are older ones who are trying to conceive and having difficulty. But other than these forms of like practical support, as Minister Josephine Teo herself said, I don't think it really makes it more attractive to be a parent. I'm a parent myself of a two-year-old son, and honestly, parenting is tough with or without government support. And in other countries, particularly the East Asian ones, they have been very generous with government support, subsidies, parental leave, but the fertility rate has not really improved and is no better than ours. So government resources and more parental leave does not necessarily mean that you would persuade people to have children. It's a choice that you make on your own, I think.
And there's a lot of factors at play. It's not just about whether I have enough money or not. There's a lot of tension between work and family within ourselves as well. I'm speaking as a woman and you're speaking as a mother, correct?
Yeah. So we all know time is limited, right? We only have 24 hours in a day. And there is a lot of tension that we feel. And I guess as young adults, there's a lot of pressure also to do well in all our pursuits in life. So increasingly young people feel like they need to do well in everything. We want to, do our work. And if we want to be a parent, you want to be a good parent as well. And we still want to travel and kind of see the world. And sometimes having a family seems a little bit disruptive because you have to put things on hold. And in a previous interview I did with Minister Josephine Teo, she said that she used this juggling ball analogy. Like she described parenting as a juggling balls. Like the more balls you have, more responsibilities and commitments, it's harder to juggle and you feel more and more stretched. And I totally agree with her. Sometimes it feels, you are really stretched every day trying to fulfill everything that you need to. But I guess the message that maybe my own takeaway is that some activities can be put aside for the time being. Some things can be done later. There's no need to be to excel at everything or to be at the top of your game at everything in work or in other commitments as well. And I think if you really want to have children, it all boils down to your own personal priorities and your own aspirations.
And everyone is on a different parenting journey. Right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amelia, for sharing. So for the full list of policy enhancements, you can read it on thestraitstimes.com. Now for our second segment, everyone's going on about video productions, how videos are the new way to consume media. But if you're looking for another way to get your information, why not podcasts? While podcasts have been popular for quite some time in the US and Australia, it's slowly gaining traction again in Singapore, and more news and media outlets in Singapore are producing their own. To talk about the growing popularity of podcasts and their own recommended list of podcasts to listen to, I have Melissa and Ernest with me. Hi both.
Hello, Ali.
Hi.
So Melissa is a deputy live editor and she's a regular contributor to the Live Picks podcast. Yes. And Ernest is the head of podcast productions here for SC and the Business Times. Okay, so let's just talk about podcasts. Why is it so popular now in Singapore? You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think we're sort of like seeing a new wave. It had been revived in the United States and Europe actually for the past few years. I find that the trends are increasing in Asia, especially in China and South Korea and all that. Singapore actually is like the fourth biggest market for podcasts in Asia actually. And we found that out from research. And even in our own podcast when we started in March last year, 2018, I found that our numbers were actually starting slowly at the start of the year. But then I found that there was a real increase in February this year. And in the last 9 months, for example, we have seen a 300% jump in our downloads. We're now averaging more than 20,000 downloads a month. Yeah.
For someone who is new to podcasts, can you tell me the difference between listening to a podcast versus listening to a radio show?
It's really just an on-demand radio show. So maybe if you took a radio show and you cut it into a certain section and then you can play it whenever you want, that's really a podcast. And it's quite specific in terms of topics. So there are podcasts in all different topics, and we have a whole range of topics as well, just in ST, which we will talk about, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, radio is live, and podcast, I would say, is more audio in demand. So if you don't have time to catch it live, you can always catch the episode. It's more or less like you can do it while you're on the go, while you're walking or you're exercising, you're listening. You don't have to listen to your favorite songs now. You can listen to your favorite podcast as well.
Easy analogy, I think, is just TV versus Netflix. It's radio versus podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe you can tell me a bit more about the podcast that both of you are, okay, Ernest is working on a lot of podcasts, but Melissa, maybe you can tell me more about the ST Live Pick. So that is one of the Straits Times top podcasts, so maybe you want to plug it.
Sure. So Life Picks is really a guide to what to do in Singapore for the next few weeks. So we do this every week. The podcast comes out on Thursdays, and we touch on various things like films, concerts, restaurants, arts events. And so our journalists at Life, who are experts in their various fields, will come onto the podcast and they will recommend what they think is good, what they've eaten recently, what they've seen recently, or what's coming up. And that's really valuable, I think, because they are the ones who really know their beat, and they then just give us a quick snippet of like 2-3 minutes on what they think is the best thing for the next week or so. And so that's what people can tune into on the Life Picks podcast.
And Life Picks podcast, like a lot of the podcasts that ST produces now, we produce now like 10 series, and I sort of like designed it sort of Netflix style series. So we have themes, you know, for the various shows. It's Life Picks, you've got Money Hacks, you've got Health Check. And the thing is about all these podcasts, if you notice for us, I mean, if the viewers can actually go and check it out, we will provide links as well. They're designed to be like, you know, punchy podcasts, you know, very conversational, as Mel said. You know, it's straight, the host gets straight to their content. In the US and in Europe, if you listen to a lot of podcasts, they are at least like 1 hour, 1.5 hours, and sometimes the host, right, they can spend the first 5 minutes talking about, hey, how was your hair? I like your makeup and all this. You know, I was having this dream last night and all that.
Just chit chat.
Yeah, I find that the stats tell us that our listeners in Singapore, they can't be bothered with such nonsense.
That's why the podcasts are kept very short, 15 minutes at most.
15 minutes, yeah. We find that's the sweet spot, and everyone just wants to tell me where to eat the best durians, you know, and what's the top episode for Life Picks?
Actually, it is a durian episode.
And I'm surprised because I thought it would be something that's very visual, because food pictures sell, right, for food.
But the other thing is, I mean, besides looking at the pictures, you hear experts like Xue, experts like Hedy and Eunice, Ayok also, you know, they're talking about these things that they've eaten. So they gush about the durian, and then Hedy was like, oh, this black thorn is so amazing. You have to try it. So it's a different way in which to get to know our writers as well, not just through print, but through the podcast and just listening to them and what they have to say.
It's very expressive. I think when you listen to them and when you read them in print or online, it's very different. To listen to them talk about a durian, right, and how fleshy it is, juicy and all, they've really perfected it. I can't do it. I think I'll make people laugh, but they have really perfected that art, I think. And that's one of the reasons why Life Picks is so great to listen to, actually.
Yeah.
So since we're on the topic of popular podcasts, right, what do you think works for a podcast and what do you think doesn't work, since you've been doing this for a few months now?
I think what he said about punchy, it has to be short, punchy. I think also having experts that are on the podcast really works. Like, these are people who know their beat very well. So people will tune in because they know that they're experts in their field. I also think people who are quite emotional and quite animated as well on a podcast, passionate, that helps. Yeah, passionate. So like Xue, for the recent podcast, which is coming out Thursday, Xue talks about a flan de yuzu, which is a yuzu cake with coconut, and she's gushing and she calls it the best cake she's had this year. Where to find this cake? Your listeners and your viewers will have to find out.
That's a good
The other thing is also like the other podcasts that we have guest experts for, like Health Check, say for example, and I do try and tweak those together with our health correspondent, where sometimes I'm having dinner at a food court or something, and then I see this bunch of uncles and aunties, hey, soursop, eat soursop, no cancer. You know, then I'm thinking, is this really true? And then we take it back to the doctors who come in for the podcast, and then we debunk these myths. And some of these episodes are actually in our top 10 list.
And the soursop one is one of your top 10, right?
Yes, it's one of our top 10. In fact, we have other topics like, forget about raising your good cholesterol. Like, huh? Does that make sense? Okay, I need to tune in to find out why one of the top doctors is telling us to forget about raising our good cholesterol. You want to find out why. We have even certain episodes that are sponsored, and sometimes the sponsored podcasts are not all that bad actually. If you have content that's relatable to the younger audience, they find that if it's useful, as Mel said, punchy, practical podcast, they want to listen. So for example, one of the top 10 podcasts, which happens to be sponsored, how to start investing with just $100 a month in your 20s. Wouldn't you want to know that?
Yes, I do. I would like to grow my nest egg.
Another thing that did very well for Life Picks was 4 plays to catch from August to October. So that's really quick. We go through 4 of the top plays, including like Pandemonium's Urinetown, Wild Rice's Merdeka, which is happening in their new theatre. So and then we provide the links. So you hear from Olivier or which of our arts correspondents, you hear from them about these plays, and then you provide the links, and then people can just go and book a ticket right after they've heard the recommendation. So it's really practical and useful and efficient as well.
We started with about 4 podcasters. I mean, myself, Mel, and 2 more were the original pioneer podcasters in the newsroom last year.
Podcasters.
Then now we've built it up to about like 20 podcasters, all different shows, and they range from the Straits Times to the Business Times to even the new paper as well. Yeah.
Now, since we're talking about what's doing well, who are actually listening to this podcast? Where do they listen to the podcast, and on what sort of device do they use? Okay,
so I find that the demographics for us, mainly in ST and BT, would be 18 to 35. Now, Health Check, having said that, Health Check, because it's a health series, with titles like Soursop, Can It Cure Cancer and all that, I think there's an older crowd that's above 35 that's tuning into that. So I'm actually quite interested in developing that further. The other thing is that when we had the podcast, we wanted it to reach an international audience. So the idea is that you can consume Straits Times in different ways than you used to before. People have been reading the Straits Times since 1845. They've been watching Straits Times videos in the last decade. Now they have an option to listen to Straits Times content. And we made sure that we targeted the 3 main platforms, Spotify, which is very popular among the youth here, Apple Podcasts, which has been a mainstay, and Google Podcasts as well. And Google has been developing its podcasts as well. The other thing is that we find that 60% of our traffic comes from people using just mobile devices. They don't actually go to the Straits Times website. They are finding our podcasts on all these 3 platforms. Now, 30% of our traffic comes from smart speaker devices like the Google Home and Minis. So these are devices that you can place at home, and you can get them at Best Denki and Challenger and all this, and you just say, hey, Google, play me the ST podcast or something like that, and then they will play. So while you're ironing on clothes or showering or something like that, you can listen to.
Or having 2 hands full of a baby.
It's true. I just told Ernest that when I gave birth to my child, that was my lifeline to what was happening outside, because I could just go, okay, Google, play me an ST podcast, and I would get the news, I would get the arts picks, I would get all these things. So it was really, really helpful. And especially when you are, holding a baby, feeding, changing, doing all these things. And I guess that's what people are doing at home. They're listening to these podcasts at home. But having said that, they're also listening to them on their smartphone devices. In the US, when I was reporting there, we found that a lot of people were on their long commutes, and so they listen to these really long podcasts, 1 hour. But in Singapore, the commutes are much shorter, so I think 15 minutes, 10 minutes, that's about the length of their commute, and then they listen to the podcast then.
And as we talk to more people, we find out that even in the cars when you're driving, you don't just tune into the radio now. Because of Bluetooth,
you just turn on the podcast.
You can just stream the podcast through your car speakers.
That's great. So last question for both of you. So moving forward, what is next? Is there anything that you're anticipating? Can you give us a sneak peek?
Well, I think one of the things that we are trying, because we've sort of like having a podcast for almost every desk in the Straits Times now. What we're trying to do now is to raise awareness, to try and improve the awareness of our series, various series, how they can be practical for you. So we're trying to come up with a marketing campaign next, you know, to raise awareness for the podcast. And I'm also hoping to introduce podcasts to a wider and older audience because we know that the younger audience is coming to us. So I'll be conducting a talk at the National Library tomorrow in Victoria Street, the Central Public Library, and that's at 7 p.m.
And it's free?
Yes, people can turn up, but you have to register. So yeah, so just turn up and find out how you can sort of like basically listen to the podcast on the go. And I'll be showing people how to download the apps and then listen to it on the go. And they can not just listen to ST and BT podcasts, they can listen to a whole range of other podcasts.
And that would be goodwill on your part,
yes.
Right? Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ernest and Melissa.
Thanks.
Now, if you're interested in checking out the podcast, you can search the Straits Times on Spotify, Apple, and on Google Podcasts. We do have links here for you to type it in, so it's easier. For a quick glance at all the latest podcasts, you can check them out at this link below. Okay? So those are our top stories for today. Thank you for joining us. For more news and videos, do log on to straitstimes.com. Once again, I'm Melissa. For more big stories, see you tomorrow.